The night was quiet at the Korean Aerospace Research Institute. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago. Only the night shift remained, watching screens filled with static and distant star noise. It was boring work. Nothing ever happened on the night shift. Dr. Yuna Park sat alone in the main control room. She was 34 years old, with tired eyes and cold coffee sitting next to her keyboard. She had worked at the institute for 8 years. In all that time, she had never found anything important. Just noise. Always noise. But tonight was different. At exactly 2:47 in the morning, her computer made a sound she had never heard before. It was not the usual beep of background radiation. It was not the hum of a distant pulsar. This sound was structured, organized. It had a pattern. Yuna sat up straight. Her heart began to beat faster. She ran the signal through the translation software that humanity had developed after first contact with alien species 15 years ago. The software worked for 3 minutes. Then words appeared on her screen. The words made her blood run cold. Please help us. We are dying. Our moon is breaking apart. 3 billion of us will die. Please, anyone, help us. The message repeated, again and again. And behind the words, Yuna could hear sounds. Crying, children crying, adults begging, the sounds of a civilization facing extinction. She picked up her phone and called her supervisor. Then she called the director. Within 2 hours, the entire institute was awake and working. By sunrise, the message had reached the United Earth Assembly. The signal came from a species called the Valori. They lived on a moon in a distant part of the galaxy. Their moon was old and unstable. Its core was collapsing. Within weeks, the entire moon would crack apart, and everyone on it would die. But there was a problem. A very big problem. Humanity was still new to the galactic community. They had only made first contact 15 years ago. In that time, they had learned that the galaxy was governed by something called the Galactic Council. The council was ancient. It had existed for over 10,000 years. It made the laws that all species had to follow, and one of those laws was about the Valori. 200 years ago, the Valori had broken an ancient treaty. The details were complicated, and most humans did not fully understand them. But the punishment was clear. The Valori were exiled, banished to their dying moon, and no species was allowed to help them. Anyone who helped the Valori would face total isolation. No trade, no communication, no protection. For a young species like humanity, this punishment would be devastating. The Council sent a formal message to Earth within hours of learning that humans had received the signal. The message was simple and cold. Do not interfere. The Valori made their choice. They must face the consequences. If humanity helps them, humanity will share their fate. The United Earth Assembly met in emergency session. Representatives from every nation gathered to debate what to do. The arguments were fierce and emotional. Some said humanity could not afford to be isolated. Earth was still recovering from the climate wars of the previous century. They needed alien technology. They needed trade. They needed protection from the dangers of a galaxy they barely understood. Others said humanity could not ignore a cry for help. 3 billion people were going to die. Children were going to die. What kind of species would humanity be if they turned away from suffering just to protect their own comfort? Admiral Temin Kong sat in the back of the assembly hall and listened. He was 61 years old. His hair was gray, and his face was lined with the scars of a long career. He had commanded Earth's first interstellar fleet for 5 years. He knew better than anyone how weak humanity really was compared to the older species of the galaxy, but he also remembered his grandfather's stories. Stories about a war long ago, when his country was invaded and nearly destroyed. Foreign soldiers had come from across the ocean to help. They did not speak the same language. They did not share the same culture. But they came anyway. They fought and bled and died for strangers. Timon had asked his grandfather why. Why would anyone die for people they had never met? His grandfather had smiled and said, "Because that is what good people do." Now Timon watched the assembly argue about costs and benefits and political consequences. He felt something cold growing in his chest. Something that felt like Shane Dot in the communications center. Dr. Yuna continued to work on the signal. She had established direct contact with a Velori scientist named Orin. He was old and tired, but his mind was still sharp. He sent her star charts and atmospheric data. He told her about his people, about their history and their art and their children. One night, after hours of work, Orin asked her a question that she would never forget. "Every species we contacted refused to help us," he said. "They all said the same thing. They said helping us would cost too much. So I must ask you, Dr. Park, what does it cost you to save us?" Yuna stared at the screen. She thought about her apartment, her career, her comfortable life. She thought about the crying children in the background of every transmission. "We do not calculate the cost of saving lives," she said. There was silence on the other end. Then Orin spoke again, and his voice was different, softer, almost broken. "In 200 years, you are the first person to say that to us." The assembly voted the next day. The result was close, but the decision was made. Humanity would obey the Council's warning. They would not send help to the Velori. Yuna received the news in her control room. She sat alone in the dark, listening to the signal that still played on her speakers. The crying had not stopped. It would not stop until everyone was dead. She thought about Orin, about the children, about what kind of species humanity was choosing to become. Somewhere in the darkness of space, 3 billion souls waited for help that would never come, but the story was not over. Not yet, because sometimes the most important decisions are not made by assemblies or governments. Sometimes they are made by ordinary people who simply refuse to look away. And in the shadows of Earth's military command, a plan was already forming. A plan that would change everything. A plan that would show the galaxy what humanity was truly made of. The signal kept playing. And somewhere, someone was listening. Captain Hana Cho stood on the observation deck of the UE's horizon and watched Earth turn slowly below her. The planet was beautiful from up here. Blue oceans, green forests, white clouds swirling over continents. It looked peaceful. It looked like a world that had never known suffering. But Hana knew better. She had seen suffering. She had spent her entire career running toward it. 20 years ago, she had been a young rescue worker during the Pacific tsunami of 2089. She had pulled children from collapsed buildings. She had held dying strangers in her arms. She had learned something important during those terrible days. She learned that the worst thing a person could do was look away from someone who needed help. 10 years later, she had led the rescue mission during the Mars colony collapse. 3,000 colonists were trapped underground with no air and no hope. Everyone said it was impossible to save them. Hana saved them anyway. She lost 19 members of her team doing it, but she brought those colonists home. Now she was 46 years old. Her body was covered in scars. Her hair was turning gray, but her eyes were still sharp, and her heart was still the same. She had watched the assembly vote to abandon the Velori. She had listened to politicians talk about costs and consequences and political reality. And she had felt something break inside her. That night, she sent an encrypted message to Admiral Timon Kong. The message was short. "Give me volunteers only. Unofficial mission. If we fail, Earth can deny us. But I will not watch 3 billion people die without trying to save them." She waited for a response. Hours passed. She did not sleep. She just stood at the window and watched the stars. Finally, her communicator buzzed. The message from Teeman was even shorter than hers. You have 48 hours. God be with you. Hannah moved fast. She sent messages to every rescue worker, engineer, doctor, and pilot she had ever served with. She told them the truth. This mission was not official. They would probably become exiles. They might die. There was no guarantee of success. She asked only one question. Will you come anyway? The responses came faster than she expected. Within 12 hours, she had over 3,000 volunteers. Doctors from hospitals in Seoul and Tokyo, engineers from shipyards in Busan, pilots from air forces around the world, soldiers who had never met a Valori, but who refused to let children die. She had to turn people away. There was not enough room on the ships. The final crew was 2,400 people from 12 different nations. They gathered in secret at a military station on the dark side of the moon. 3 ships waited for them. The Horizon, the Mercy, and the Dawn. Old ships. Tired ships. Ships that were never designed for a journey this long or this dangerous. Engineer Do-Yoon Lim walked through the engine room of the Horizon and shook his head. He was 39 years old with oil-stained hands and a permanent frown. He had been maintaining starships since he was 19. He knew every bolt and wire of these vessels. These ships are held together with hope and tape, he told Captain Hana. The engines are old. The shields are weak. We will be lucky if they survive the journey. Hannah looked at him. Can you keep them running? Do-Yoon was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. I will keep them running, or I will die trying. That is all I ask. Dr. Yuna Park arrived on the last shuttle. She had resigned from her position at the Institute. She had packed only a small bag. She looked tired and scared, but there was something else in her eyes. Something that looked like determination. She found Hana on the bridge. I have been talking to Oren every day, she said. He is sending us everything we need. Star charts, safe routes, information about the moon's condition. He is also sending us something else. What? Yuna's voice became soft. Stories. He is sending us stories about his people, their history, their music, the games their children play. He says that if we are coming to save them, we should know who we are saving. Hannah felt something tighten in her chest. He sounds like a good man. He is. And he is dying. The moon does not have much time left. The 3 ships launched at midnight. They moved quietly through Earth's defense grid and slipped into the darkness between stars. By the time the assembly learned what had happened, they were already gone. Ambassador Ming-Ho Beek received an emergency summons to the Galactic Council. He was a calm man, 53 years old, with a soft voice and patient eyes. He had spent his career building bridges between species. Now he watched those bridges burn. The council chamber was enormous. Representatives from 100 species sat in a great circle, their faces lit by floating screens. At the center stood the council elder, an ancient being whose species had existed for 1,000,000 years. The elder's voice was cold. Your people have violated our laws. Your ships are traveling toward forbidden space. You have chosen to help the exiles. Ming-Ho stood alone in the center of the chamber. He felt very small, but his voice did not shake. I cannot stop those ships, he said, and I am not sure I would want to. The chamber erupted in noise. Angry voices shouted in a dozen languages. The elder raised a hand for silence. Then your species will share the Valori's fate. Total isolation. For 1,000 years. Minho thought about his family back on Earth. His daughter who was studying to be a doctor. His son who wanted to be a pilot. He thought about what kind of galaxy they would inherit. Then we will endure 1,000 years, he said. But we will not watch children die and do nothing. Perhaps that makes us foolish. Perhaps that makes us weak. But I would rather be foolish and weak than wise and cruel. The chamber fell silent. No one had ever spoken to the council this way. Mino continued. You have built a galaxy of laws and treaties and punishments. But somewhere along the way, you forgot why laws exist. Laws should protect the innocent. Laws should serve justice. When laws become excuses to watch children die, they are not laws anymore. They are just cruelty wearing a mask. He turned and walked out of the chamber. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Somewhere in the darkness of space, 3 small ships flew toward an impossible mission. And across the galaxy, billions of beings watched and wondered if humanity was brave or insane. Perhaps they were both. The journey to the Valori moon was supposed to take 14 days. By the 3rd day, everything started going wrong. The first problem was the engines. Chief Engineer Do-hyun had warned that the ships were old, but even he did not expect them to fail so quickly. On the morning of day 3, the main engine of the Mercy began to overheat. Do-hyun and his team worked for 16 hours straight to repair it. They used parts from other systems. They welded broken pipes. They rewired damaged circuits. When they finished, Do-hyun had not slept in 2 days. His hands were burned from hot metal. But the engine was running. How long will it last? Captain Hana asked him through the communication screen. Long enough, he said. Maybe. The second problem was the radiation storms. The route to Valori space passed through an unstable region filled with dying stars and cosmic debris. The storms hit without warning. Waves of radiation crashed against the ship's shields, draining power and damaging systems. Lieutenant Yoonji Shin was 27 years old. She was the youngest pilot in the fleet, but she was also the best. During the storms, she flew the horizon through fields of debris that would have destroyed lesser pilots. Her hands moved across the controls like a musician playing an instrument. She dodged rocks the size of buildings. She found paths through walls of radiation. She did not sleep. She did not eat. She just flew. On the 5th day, she finally collapsed at her station. The medical team carried her to the sick bay and forced her to rest for 8 hours. When she woke up, she went straight back to the bridge. You should rest more, the doctor told her. Yoonji shook her head. I will rest when the children are safe. Dr. Yuna spent most of the journey in the communications room, talking to Orin. The Valori scientist was growing weaker every day. The air on his moon was running out. The ground was shaking constantly. Buildings were collapsing. People were dying, but Orin never complained. He just kept sending information. Maps of the underground shelters. Lists of survivors. Locations of medical facilities. He was organizing his people for a rescue that might never come. One night, Yuna asked him about his family. I had a wife, Orin said. His voice was tired but gentle. She died 2 years ago when the first earthquakes hit. I had 2 sons. One died in the mines when the tunnels collapsed. The other is somewhere in the eastern shelters. I have not heard from him in 3 weeks. Yuna did not know what to say. I am sorry. Do not be sorry, Orin said. My family knew what kind of people we are. We do not give up. We do not surrender to despair. My wife used to say that hope is the last thing to die. So I keep hoping. I keep working. And I keep believing that you will come. We are coming, Yuna said. I promise you. We are coming. Back on Earth, the news of the mission had spread. At first, the government tried to deny it. They said the ships were on a training exercise. They said it was a misunderstanding. But the truth could not be hidden for long. People reacted in different ways. Some were angry. They said the mission was reckless and dangerous. They said humanity was risking everything for aliens who meant nothing to them. But others felt something different. They felt proud. For the first time in a long time, humanity was doing something not because it was easy or profitable, but because it was right. Across the planet, people gathered to watch the mission's progress. They held vigils in parks and churches and temples. They lit candles for the crew. They prayed to whatever gods they believed in. And in the Galactic Council, something strange was happening. Ambassador Minnow had expected to be alone. He had expected every species to condemn humanity. But that was not what happened. On the 7th day of the journey, a message arrived from a species called the Korathi. They were an old species, quiet and peaceful. They had not spoken in council meetings for 300 years. The message said simply, "We are watching. We remember what compassion looks like. We had forgotten. Thank you for reminding us." More messages came. From the Velani, a species of traders who had once helped the Velori before the exile. From the Masari, gentle beings who lived on ocean worlds and sang songs of peace. From dozens of species who had been silent for centuries. They did not offer help. They were too afraid of the council for that. But they offered something else. They offered hope. On the 9th day, the Galactic Council dispatched an observation fleet to follow the human ships. The fleet was large and powerful, but it did not attack. It just watched. The council elder sent a message to Captain Hana. "We are recording everything. Your failure will serve as a warning to other young species who think they can challenge the ancient laws." Hana read the message and deleted it. She had no time for warnings. She had a mission to complete. On the 11th day, Doyan came to the bridge with bad news. The engines are failing faster than expected. The moon's collapse is accelerating. The Valori have 72 hours left. Maybe less. Hana looked at the star charts. They were still 3 days away at current speed. Can we go faster? If we push the engines beyond their limits, yes. But there is a good chance the ships will not survive the final jump into normal space. We could arrive as a fireball. Hannah thought about the children waiting on that dying moon. She thought about Orin, still sending messages, still hoping. She thought about everyone who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not come back. "Push the engines," she said. "We arrive as a fireball, or we arrive as heroes. But we arrive." Do-Yun nodded. He had expected that answer. "I will make it work." He returned to the engine room and began pushing the ships beyond anything they were designed to handle. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered. Metal groaned under the stress. But the ships flew faster. Behind them, the Galactic Council's observation fleet followed, recording everything. And across the galaxy, billions of beings held their breath. The human ships were small and old and breaking apart. But they did not stop. They did not turn back. They flew toward the impossible. The ships emerged from warp space in a storm of fire and sparks. Alarms screamed across every deck. Smoke filled the corridors. Half the systems were dead or dying, but the ships had arrived. Captain Hana stood on the bridge and looked through the main window at the Valori moon. What she saw made her heart stop. The moon was dying. Great cracks ran across its surface like wounds on skin. Fire poured from the ground. The atmosphere was burning away, creating rivers of flame that stretched into space. Mountains were collapsing. Oceans were boiling. It was the end of a world, and it was happening right in front of her. "How much time do we have?" she asked. Do-Yun's voice came through the speaker, rough and exhausted. "Maybe 40 hours. Maybe less. The core is falling apart faster than we thought." Hannah turned to her crew. They were tired and scared. Many of them had never seen anything like this. But they were still standing. They were still ready. "Listen to me," she said. "Down there are 3 billion people who have been waiting 200 years for someone to help them. Today, we are that someone. I do not care if it is hard. I do not care if it is dangerous. We came here to save lives, and that is what we are going to do. Every single one of you knows what to do. So let us do it." The rescue operation began. The ships were designed to carry 3,000 passengers each. Hannah ordered them reconfigured to hold 50,000. Cargo bays were emptied and filled with beds. Hallways were converted into sleeping areas. The crew gave up their own quarters, their own food, their own oxygen rations. Shuttles launched toward the surface. Dozens of them, flying into the burning atmosphere, dodging debris and fire. Each shuttle could carry 200 people. They would need to make thousands of trips. Lieutenant Yunji flew the first shuttle down. The heat was intense. Her instruments screamed warnings. The shuttle shook so hard she could barely hold the controls. But she found the first shelter and landed on the broken ground. The door opened, and she saw the Velori for the first time. They were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They looked fragile, like creatures made of glass. But when they saw the shuttle, something changed in their faces. It was hope. Real hope after 200 years of despair. Yunji helped them board the shuttle. Mothers carrying children. Elderly people who could barely walk. Young people supporting the old. They moved quickly and quietly, without panic or chaos. They had been preparing for this moment for a long time. On her 9th trip, Yunji's shuttle was struck by falling debris. The engines failed. She crash-landed near a shelter on the eastern continent. The shuttle was destroyed. Her leg was broken. Her arm was burned, but the shelter was full of children. 400 of them, alone and scared. Their caretakers had died in a building collapse days ago. They had been waiting for rescue with no one to help them. Yunji looked at her broken shuttle. She looked at the burning sky. She looked at the children. "We are going to walk," she told them. "There is another pickup point 3 kilometers east. Can you walk with me?" The children nodded. They were scared, but they trusted her. Yunji led them across the burning landscape. Her legs screamed with every step. Her arm was useless. But she kept walking. She sang songs to keep the children calm. She told them stories about Earth, about oceans and mountains and animals they had never seen. When she finally collapsed 200 meters from the pickup point, a Velori elder lifted her onto his shoulders and carried her the rest of the way. "You could have left us," the elder said. "You were hurt. Why did you stay?" Yunji looked at the children, now boarding a shuttle to safety. "Because that is what humans do." Deep underground, Dr. Yuna finally met Oren in person. He was older than she had imagined. His blue skin had faded to gray. His hands shook when he moved, but his eyes were bright and full of life. "You came," he said. "You actually came." Yuna took his hand. "I told you we would." Oren should have been on one of the first shuttles. He was old and weak and had every right to save himself. But he had refused to leave. "The data cores," he explained. 40,000 years of our civilization. Our art, our music, our stories. The songs our mothers sang to us as children. If we lose these, we survive as bodies, but die as a people. Yuna understood. Then let us save them together. They worked side by side as the moon crumbled around them. Yuna connected her equipment to the Velori systems. Oren guided her through their ancient databases. They uploaded terabytes of data to the Horizon's computers. History, science, philosophy, children's lullabies. everything that made the Valori who they were. The ground shook constantly. The ceiling cracked. Dust and debris fell around them. But they kept working. "Why are you doing this?" Orin asked her during a brief pause. "Your government told you not to come. Your laws said to leave us. Why did you ignore them?" Yuna thought about the question. Because laws are supposed to protect people. When they stop doing that, they are just words on paper. We follow our conscience, not our convenience. Orin smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile. "Your species is very young, but you are very wise." "No," Yuna said. "We are not wise. We just remember what it feels like to need help. And we refuse to forget." The upload finished with minutes to spare. Orin and Yuna ran through collapsing tunnels to reach the last shuttle. The ground was splitting apart behind them. The air was almost gone. They reached the shuttle with 4 minutes left before the entire section collapsed. As the shuttle lifted off, Yuna looked out the window and watched the shelter disappear into fire and rocked out above the moon. The 3 human ships were packed beyond capacity. People filled every space. They sat in corridors and cargo bays and engine rooms. The air was thin. The food was running out. But they were alive. The final count came in. 2.7 million survivors. Not all 3 billion. Not even close. But more than anyone had believed possible. Captain Hana stood on the bridge and looked at the dying moon one last time. 16 of her crew had died during the rescue. 200 more were injured. The ships were damaged beyond repair, but they had done it. They had answered the cry. "Set course for Earth," she said quietly. "Let us go home." The ships turned away from the burning moon and began the long journey back. Behind them, the Galactic Council's observation fleet followed. Still recording. They had recorded everything. And now the galaxy would have to decide what it all meant. The journey home was slow and painful. The ships were damaged. The engines were failing. The life support systems were pushed beyond their limits. 2.7 million Valori and 2,400 humans crowded into spaces designed for a few thousand. But they were alive. And that was all that mattered. Captain Hana walked through the crowded corridors every day. She stopped to talk to the refugees. She learned their names. She listened to their stories. She held children who had lost their parents and comforted elders who had lost everything. One old Valori woman grabbed her hand as she passed. "You have given us more than life," the woman said. "You have given us something we lost 200 years ago. You have given us faith." Hannah did not know what to say, so she just held the woman's hand and sat with her in silence. On the 7th day of the return journey, something unexpected happened. The ship's sensors detected vessels ahead. Many vessels. For a moment, Hannah's heart stopped. She thought the Galactic Council had sent a fleet to stop them, to punish them, to take away everyone they had saved. But as the ships came into view, she realized she was wrong. There were 47 alien vessels waiting at the edge of Earth's solar system. They were not military ships. They were cargo haulers and passenger vessels and private yachts. Ships from a dozen different species, flying flags of peace. A message came through the communication system. The voice was strange and musical, belonging to a species Hannah had never met. "Human vessels. We watched your journey. We saw everything you did. We were ashamed. For centuries, we followed the Council's laws without question. We watched species suffer and told ourselves it was not our problem. But you showed us something we had forgotten. You showed us that compassion is not weakness. It is strength." Hannah stood on the bridge, surrounded by her exhausted crew, and listened as more messages poured in. Species she had never heard of, offering food and medicine and shelter for the refugees. Species that had been silent for generations, finally finding their voice. Today, we remember what we forgot, the first voice continued. Laws that forbid compassion are not laws worth keeping. Welcome home, humans. And welcome to the galaxy, Valori. You are not alone anymore. Hannah felt tears running down her face. She did not wipe them away. The fleet of allied ships escorted the human vessels to Earth. They brought supplies and medical teams. They helped repair the damaged systems. For the first time since leaving, Hannah allowed herself to believe they might actually make it. When the ships finally entered Earth's orbit, millions of people gathered to watch. In cities across the planet, crowds filled the streets. They cheered and cried and held signs welcome, welcoming the Valori to their new home. But the story was not over. The Galactic Council still had to respond. Admiral Timin Kong was summoned to face a tribunal for authorizing the mission. He stood alone in a courtroom filled with military officers and government officials. The charges against him were serious: treason, endangering humanity, violating interstellar law. The prosecutor spoke for 3 hours, listing every crime, every regulation broken, every risk taken. When he finished, he asked Timin if he had anything to say in his defense. Timin stood slowly. His uniform was old and worn. His face was tired, but his voice was strong. "You asked me to defend what I did," he said. "But I do not need to defend compassion. I do not need to justify mercy. 5,000 years ago, my ancestors carved a word into stone. The word was in. It means benevolence. It means that your suffering is my suffering, that your children are my children, that borders and laws and politics end where life begins." He looked around the courtroom. We did not teach the galaxy this lesson. We only reminded them of what they already knew. And I would do it again. 1,000 times, I would do it again. Because this is who we are. This is what humanity means. The courtroom was silent. Then, slowly, one officer began to clap. Then another. Then another. Within moments, the entire room was standing, applauding a man who had broken every rule to do the right thing. Timin was acquitted. Unanimously, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session 3 weeks later. For 6,000 years, their laws had been absolute. No species had ever successfully challenged them. But humanity had changed something. The recordings of the rescue mission had spread across the galaxy. Billions of beings had watched humans risk everything to save strangers. They had watched Captain Hana lead her exhausted crew into fire. They had watched Lieutenant Yunji carry children across burning ground. They had watched Dr. Yuna save 40,000 years of history in a collapsing tunnel. For the first time in millennia, species began to question the old laws. The debates lasted for months. But in the end, the council made a decision. The Valori exile was repealed. New amendments were added to the ancient treaties. The most important one was simple: no species shall be denied aid in existential crisis. It became known as the human precedent. Years passed. The Valori built a new home on a world given to them by a coalition of species who had watched humanity's mission. They called the planet New Hope. On the first anniversary of the rescue, they erected a statue of Captain Hana in their capital city. Hannah herself retired from active duty. She spent her remaining years on New Hope, helping the Valori rebuild. She learned their language. She attended their festivals. She became godmother to hundreds of children born in the years after the rescue. When she died at 91, 3 million Valori attended her funeral. The ceremony lasted 3 days. Lieutenant Yunji Shin became the first human accepted into the newly formed Galactic Humanitarian Corps. The organization was founded on a simple principle: no one gets left behind. Within 10 years, it had members from over 200 species. Ambassador Minho Beak, became the first human elected to the Galactic Council's Leadership Committee. His first act was to propose a memorial day for all species who had suffered under unjust laws. And at the Korean Aerospace Research Institute on Earth, a statue was erected of Dr. Yuna Park and Oren standing side by side, one human, one alien, holding a data core between them. The core contained the soul of a civilization, its art, its music, its stories, its dreams. The plaque beneath the statue bore words that Yuna had spoken long ago, during a conversation that had changed history. They asked what it would cost us. We answered, everything, and we would pay it gladly. Oren lived for another 12 years after the rescue. He spent those years teaching Velori children about their history and about the strange, young species that had crossed the stars to save them. On his final night, surrounded by family and friends, he was asked what he remembered most about the humans. He smiled, his old eyes bright with memory. I remember asking them a question, he said. I asked what it cost them to save us, and they told me something I will never forget. They said, we do not calculate the cost of saving lives. He closed his eyes. That is when I knew we would survive. Outside, the stars burned bright in the endless sky. Somewhere out there, a young species was just learning to listen to the universe. And somewhere, someday, they would hear a cry for help. When that day came, humanity hoped they would answer it, because that is what good people do.